Hello buddy, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 Quick Match gameplay. Now, this time around, we are going to be playing as Norsca against the forces of the Dawi on the map Tarantula Coast. And this is a matchup with which I've been having quite a bit of difficulty lately, and I know some of you guys have mentioned you've had difficulty with it as well, and so I've kind of been messing around with it. Recently on live stream, I actually ran into Yumi's with Norsca and brought one of my more conventional builds, just centered on a horde of infantry with some heroes on chariots, a handful of manticores to try to zone away gyros, and, well, Yumi's crumped me hard. I got smushed. Yumi's, for those of you who don't know, is a top tier dwarf player. He's really competitive with the dwarves, plays them a lot, so perhaps not entirely surprising, but he just outplayed me hard, brought gyrocopters, to which Norsca just does not have good counters, a bunch of cannons that just wrecked my heroes on chariots. I couldn't micro them fast enough to dodge, and it was just a disaster. But after that, I did have a chat with Yumi's, and he actually brought up some good points and gave me some good tips about how to play this matchup from a Norscan perspective. And the idea is to just rush the dwarves down and crush them with overwhelming force before their gyros can really kick in. Because as Norsca, you are not going to beat a gyros. Gyrocopters, for one, are just too hard to hit for your missile units. You don't have any black powder missile units, so those will not hit worth a darn. And whatever does hit, it's probably not an AP. If you go with javelins, it's not even AP, so the 100 armor is going to shrug it off. Plus, your chance of killing a model on only 3 entities is very low. None of your magic is very good for sniping gyrocopters. To be honest, magic in general is just not good against gyrocopters. And your only flying units is either a very expensive Frost Drake, which is just not a good idea, Frostworm, or a Feral Manticore, which can zone them away, but due to the way, well, one, it's too slow to catch them in the first place, but due to the way aerial attack animations work, especially if it's one entity against one entity, as long as one unit's moving away, you're basically never going to land a hit, so Manticore has a very hard time actually doing damage to gyros. So because of that, I figured, you know what, the countering's probably not going to work. Let's just rush him down, and that's what this build is centered around. For my lord, I'm rolling with Wulfric the Wanderer. He is mounted on a Mammoth. That gives him a beefy HP pool of 1,584, or 10,584. Yeah, 1,000 would not be impressive. And he's got some monstrous combat stats. 70 armor, not terrible. Doesn't mean he can shrug off a few crossbow bolts or whatever if needed. He does get 15% missile resist because he is still a lord, so that is a big boon there against all this Dawi gunpower, which we're seeing here. He does have the Fight or Die ability, which can grant him a little more leadership, grant nearby units more melee attack. Good against Dawi because they do tend to have high melee defense. Foe Seeker, Rage, which of course means he'll get tankier as the fight progresses. If he lasts 90 seconds in combat, he is going to get an extra 11% physical resist, which makes him even beefier alongside that missile resist. And then Hunter of Champions. So if my opponent went with a decent lord choice, or like a fighty lord choice, I'd be able to potentially snipe them out. Now, alongside him, we do have the Soul Crusher right here, which, of course, does have Enrage. So if my opponent tries to focus Soul Crusher, we can pop that, get 22 seconds of 44% ward save, which is nuts. For our caster, we do have a Shaman Sorcerer of Metal. This guy actually doesn't count as a single entity on a chariot, which is great, because the chariot is still a brutally effective unit. As long as you don't get shut down by gyros or cannons, this guy gets in, he will do lots of damage, and he's got Transmutation of Lead, he's got Plague of Rust, so I can debuff enemy armor to make my Berserkers more effective, or my Marauders more effective, or otherwise, I can use Transmutation of Lead to protect Wulfric against Berserkers, for example. Sorry, not against Berserkers, against Slayers. Getting my dual axe-wielding units confused for a moment there, but against Slayers, for example, you can help protect your troops a little bit, help them trade a little more efficiently than they normally would. Now, besides that, we do have a Feral Manticore, which actually does count as a single entity, which really sucks. It makes it difficult. I wanted to bring 2 Manticores, but I can't bring 2 Mammoths and 2 Manticores, so here we are, folks. Brought a single Feral Manticore, figured it can do some zoning. On the ground, we do have 2 units of Berserkers, as well as the Brutes of the Hound. These guys will actually mince through Dwarven infantry pretty effectively, and they will decimate Slayers, especially, which is one of the big threats. So against the cheaper, lower-end Dwarven troops that you usually see as a screening tool, they'll do great. Besides that, lots of Marauders to swarm, to crush enemy miners, and that sort of thing. 2 units of Marauders great weapons, as well, to do some good damage against armored troops. Now, for my opponent, he has gone with 4 gyrocopters with brimstone guns, which is absolutely terrifying. There's very little I can do against them. In fact, there's basically nothing I can do against them. All I can do is really send out my Manticore and try to zone at least 1 or 2 of them away, keep them off my butt. Now, for the rest of my opponent's build, he has brought 3 units of cannons, and these guys are immediately teeing off on pulled Wulfric. Actually missed most of their initial volley and ended up hitting the Brutes of the Hound, but still very unpleasant to deal with. They are backed by a very broad infantry line, though fortunately for me, there are not many Slayers. We've got the Dragon Max Slayers here. Besides that, only some Longbeards, some Dwarf Warriors with great weapons, and the front line is mostly just a hodgepodge of Dwarf Warriors, Warriors with Dragonfire Pass, and some Miners with blasting charges. So Not the most brutal infantry line, and certainly the mammoths should be able to soak up enough damage, get in here, crush the cannon, and do some good work. In the meantime, we also do have a Rune Lord, which I should have mentioned. He's brought the Rune of Wrath and Ruin, so going super budget here. So definitely not going to be tanking very much. Now, in comes the mammoths. Wolfric is simply charging. I'm ordering him to charge here into the miners. I don't care if I take some hits here from blasting charges. We're just going to plow right through them and do some monstrous damage. Soul Crusher repeating the maneuver on the far flank there and just crumping these poor miners who just do not stand a chance. Losing about 10 models on the charge, maybe even more, as that giant chariot essentially plows through. In the meantime, over here, much less effective. Shaman Sorcerer, it does get bogged down on these miners with blasting charges. Takes about 7 models off him, which is not bad, but not doing too hot either. Over here, Wolfric does plow through, gets hit by Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin. And one of the big downsides with my opponent's strat here is the fact that because he invested so much in shooting, he doesn't have the money to crowd control enough. He can't bring multiple runesmiths or anything of that nature to slow me down. So now Wolfric is just rampaging. He does 7,000 HP. He looks really bludgeoned, and he is really bludgeoned. But 7,000 HP is not a laughing matter. Cannons flying left and right. Soul Crusher in the meantime trying to plow through and get on top of that cannon. As the gyros continue to be pestered, and some of them here are getting sort of distracted, focusing on units they should not be bothering with, like the Manticore. Wolfric here being slowed down. I popped Fight or Die because I didn't want him to route to the Slayer Harass. You can see here my opponent does pull the cannon offline. It actually doesn't route, so that is a big problem for me. Over here, though, the Shaman Sorcerer of Metal is crushing some dwarves in melee, blowing up their cannons, and teaching them a lesson. Over here, in the meantime, Marauders just swarming all over. Because my opponent's miners were actually bogged down in melee, they didn't get their blasting charges off, so now they're getting crushed here in close quarters. Unfortunately, the Manticore does dive down because it's been rampaged by the gyros, so that's very, very frustrating. But we are now getting that full surround, that sweeping blitz on the dwarves. Definitely helped by the small nature of this island map, but still, we are crushing through them. Wolfric here taking a pounding down to 5,500 HP, just towering over these dwarves. And getting his heels nipped at. So we do drop a Transmutation of Lead there. You can see the circle as he's being pursued, and simply shrugs off these Dragonback Slayers and runs away. We definitely don't want to take too much damage from them. Keep in mind, Dragonback Slayers also imbue the power of the Dragonback on me. So if they hit me, I'm going to take more fire damage, which is not what you want. We do use Foe Seeker here, trying to keep our leadership up, our vigor up, and trying to just stay combat effective, avoid getting bogged down for too long. You can't see the Warriors of Dragonfire pass here, just getting torn through by that blob of mammoth flesh and tusk, and 44% damage resist kicking in for Soul Crusher, making him basically invulnerable, and the Dragonfire Pass boys are crushed. They completely die here, they just collapse, and this horde of angry Marauders with great weapons, Berserkers, and the Manticore just plowing through. Now, the Manticore here rampaging, nothing I can do about it, just going to plow into the Dragonback Slayers. Definitely not ideal. Wolfric in the meantime getting pounded on by those very annoying gyros. Nothing I can do about that, so I'm just throwing him into some units, trying to do as much damage as I can, dropping a Plague of Rust on these Dwarf Warriors to allow the Zergs to crush them faster, which they will do very effectively. Zergs, with their monstrous weapon strength of 58, if units drop to 25 armor, they will mulch it very, very quickly, no matter their melee defense. So these guys not having a good day. Wolfric, though, getting slowed again and getting hit by the Dragonback Slayers here. Basically reduced to crawl. 5 speed is a joke, and he's not able to squeak away at all. He's taking just a pounding from those gyros, losing hundreds of HP at a time, and it's pretty brutal stuff. Fortunately, though, we do have that physical resist now, so we are up to 26% missile resist combined against all this stuff. You know, it does help. Every little bit helps when you're dying like this. In the meantime, though, Soul Crusher, you're overwhelming the backline. We are able to get in on the Rune Lord, surrounding him with Marauders. Rune Lord is not a bad combatant, to be honest, but against Soul Crusher, the raw might of the Mammoth, it is not going to be a good day for him. He just is getting crumped, losing hundreds of HP per swing there, and definitely on the run almost immediately. Cannon Crew just kind of sitting around here, looking at their friends getting crushed. Manticore here pursues the gyros. Big misplay here on my opponent's part, not splitting the gyros, so a little bit of a micro slip up. And Wolfric actually routes to the fire of just this one unit of gyros is still there. And we are going to lose these Marauders here as well. So definitely unfortunate stuff, but at this point it just doesn't matter. Balance of power is too decisively in my favor. We've actually crushed the Slayers, I believe. The Berserkers have cleaned them up here in the pits, just overrunning those rampaging Dwarves. And at this stage, my opponent doesn't really have much. He's got these Dwarf Warriors, which unfortunately are drawing the aggro from the Berserkers. So instead of pursuing these Dwarf Warriors to a good spot, they're sort of falling back stupidly. My opponent here does commit his gyros to chase off Wolfric, but at this stage it just doesn't matter. Soul Crusher is still very healthy. There's nothing my opponent can do. So the strat worked. Now keep in mind, this map, I wouldn't say it's an ideal map. You can potentially get a map that's even better suited to this sort of Mammoth Rush. If you get a map that is very dense, there's a few, I believe it's like Northwestern Forest, or if you got a very tiny map, like for example Kelp and Coal Dust, I believe this strat would be even more brutally effective, because you could close on your opponent within seconds. But that aside, the map definitely helped a bit. If you got a massive map, let's say you got, I'm trying to think what let's say you got MP Blue Reach River. That map is very large. There's a lot of space. Or for example, Chaos Wastes. One of those maps, those are just massive. There's not much coverage where you can sort of hide your mammoths, and you do have to cross a significant amount of space to close on your opponent. So that could have been a bit more brutal for me, because Wolfric might have died a bit sooner, and that could have led to a snowball effect where units' leadership just collapses. Norsca is not a faction with sort of infamously good leadership. Their leadership is kind of and so it can be a problem for them. And obviously, and unlike a faction like, say, Chaos, who can just bring Sorthroyal and just say, screw your missiles, I don't care. That's not the case for Norsca. So it's really kind of difficult. You certainly will take a lot of damage. Now, Wolfric, though, did a lot there. He tanked a lot of shots. He lasted for a very long time. That 15% built-in missile is huge. It means that your HP of 10,000 is actually worth even more, because your opponent needs to do that extra additional chunk of damage to bring you down. He's only getting, 85% of that damage, which doesn't matter. And stacked on top of a little bit of armor negation, and then you get your physical resist kicking in from the rage, and you're in a pretty good spot. Soul Crusher, of course, keep in mind, Soul Crusher was still very much active at the end. My opponent had to make a pick here. If he had focused the Shaman Sorcerer of Fire, which I think would have been the best choice, to be honest, he would have left Wolfric and the Soul Crusher completely untouched, and that would have potentially had disastrous results. If he had focused the Soul Crusher, well, that would have probably been a really bad move, because Soul Crusher has Enrage, so it can shrug off a lot. So he really had two choices. It was either Wolfric or the Mammoth, or the Shaman Sorcerer, sorry. And he chose Wolfric, and it just didn't work out. The Marauders, they did okay. This sort of very wide build, obviously you cannot bring that much good or even competitive infantry, and it's just very difficult to keep everything alive. If your opponent doesn't bring any Slayers, the Mammoths can have an absolute shop on basically everything here. And if your opponent even brings Gotrek or Felix, you can kind of cycle charge them with a Mammoth and do some brutal work. Plus, Berserkers will actually demolish it. It's one of the few situations where Berserkers are really strong against the high-end Dwarf unit, is against Gotrek, because Gotrek, of course, has no armor. And while his melee defense is honestly kind of ridiculous for a Footlord, he's got 50 melee defense, which is kind of really high for a Footlord with so much combat prowess. But all that aside, Berserkers will mince him to bits pretty quick. So no matter what your opponent brings, this build I think is decent. Definitely, it's very much about being aggressive. You got to push fast. So, but big props to Yumi's for the great advice he gave me. I think that I did feel like this build worked a lot better for me than the infantry builds I'd been running before. So I definitely think it was pretty good. I do still hate the fact that you cannot counter gyrocopters really as Norsca. Even if you commit fully to Manticores, you can only bring 3 of them because they count as a single entity monster. It just sucks. There's no two ways around that. That just sucks. And I really wish the game it wasn't that way. I really hate that fact, to be honest with you guys. But it is what it is. Perhaps in the future we will see some improvements made. Perhaps we'll see some new units implemented, some Harpies added, perhaps from Norsca or something along those lines, which could help them in this situation. But until then, I really do think this is probably the best way to go. Probably a smart way to go, unless you've got a really compact map that denies your opponent artillery usage, in which case perhaps you can pull Chariot play off. But besides that, I definitely think this is a good way to go. Big thanks to Yumi's for the advice. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you found it informative and perhaps helped you guys out if you're struggling with this matchup. And I do thank you all for watching. Good game to Telefabian here, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.